if you hold that up again, Stephen, if you get that sign held up, it means you don't have your mic on.
Okay.
So that's
Stephen just holds it up. His boss slams it up against the...
Well, we have our own mic here, so he's present.
Mic's here, mic's on.
Okay, so we're going to be going with Bush Construction, so we're going to jump around here a little bit.
Jeez, Tim, we just talked about that.
I'm sorry. We're going to be moving on with Bush Construction here. They got a program for us here tonight. So unless anybody's got any other questions, we're going to turn it over to Alexa and Brent, you said? Yep. Okay.
Well, I'll just kind of kick it off here. So I've not met Alexa, but I met Brent, who introduced us. And so the question came up from Bush Construction as they're looking at Lafayette. Would it make sense to have a downtown historical district? And I said, I think, and I got a hold of Megan, I think that the downtown Schmid folks should hear from the pros from Dover and decide yes or no based on the information that's provided and that how it affects you. Because way back in the day, people shied away from it because they thought there were going to be harder restrictions on them if they'd have to do certain things to their buildings. So we want to make sure we go through any myths, any legends. Alexa, we're going to put you on the spot, but she's done these in different communities, so we want to have her kind of go through the A through Z, and then you guys hear from her and then answer any of your questions you guys might have of her. So is that okay, Alexa, for you to kick off? Can you give me that mouse real quick? I'll do something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, the next one over.
Can we crank her volume up?
Yep.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, ma'am. Hey, Stephen, can you?
Here, I'll even put my face on so you can put a face
There you go.
to the
Hello.
voice. Hi there. So I think the things that are important to understand about the National Register is that a National Register district or an individual property, either way, there's no difference in terms of what restrictions are, it's really an honorific designation, meaning that it's a way for a community to designate an area or a building because they think it's a significant and they want people to know it, right? So sometimes communities use the National Register with their tourism, to market for tourism, especially if they have something like the Lincoln Highway, that kind of thing. But it carries no restrictions. So if my house is on the National Register, and if I wanted to, I could tear it down. If I wanted to, it's brick, I could paint it purple. I could change out all the windows. I could do whatever I wanted to it. I would never do any of those things, but I think that most people have, or many people have, a misconception about the kind of power that designation has and potential restrictions to their ability to do what they want to do, which is what you're alluding to. Some of the confusion comes with communities that have an overlay district. So Iowa City has an overlay district. Dubuque has overlay districts. Cedar Rapids have overlay districts. And those are things that are developed by ordinance by the city council, and they establish overlay districts for areas or individual buildings that they want to protect. And those overlay districts come with a set of design guidelines, and typically those only control the exterior of buildings. And so if there was a district in Clinton, the only way that you could control what happened to the exterior of the buildings would be an overlay district established by ordinance, and again, specific guidelines that address certain things. So usually that's about storefront and a commercial area, storefronts, treatment of masonry, for example, windows, that kind of thing. The other time that restrictions come into play is if a person takes federal money for a building that's listed on the National Register. So in my house that's on the National Register, I'm doing rehab that is going to utilize historic tax credits. And the Lafayette is a great example right there, if you're familiar with that. So when Bush uses historic tax credits to do the rehab on that, they have to follow the Secretary's standards and guidelines for rehabilitation, which applies to every aspect of that rehab. So the point of the historic tax credit project is to infuse money into a historic building and protect its historic character in the meantime while it's being rehabilitated for a typically adaptive reuse. But those would be the times when there would be some controls exerted over what a person, a private property owner, could do to their property.
You stunned them to silence, Alexa. That was
Well,
very good.
apparently.
And just for you guys, we don't currently have an overlay district. We have one that we're going to get rid of in Liberty Square because it's hampering our ability to move forward on that. So do you guys have any specific questions for Alexa?
Dennis, do you have a question there?
You got to come to the mic.
Can you come over to the mic, please?
Mike, please, Dennis.
Dennis, Mike.
There's nobody here named Mike.
Yes, there is.
Yes, there is.
Oh, that's true. There's Mike. I'm sorry. Thank you. Is there an example of a community similar to Clinton that has, used this asset and had a great and positive experience? Because what I'm thinking the thing to do would be then property owner or business owner calls and talks to their peer in the other community, and let's reaffirm what you're saying, which I completely agree and understand with what you're proposing. But I just think people need to maybe hear directly from another building owner who says, yeah, this was the greatest thing that ever happened to Fort Dodge, or,
That's a good example.
Grinnell or whatever. So maybe if you can generate, and again, similar size, don't tell it, not Rockford, Illinois, that's not apples to oranges, but is there something that's similar size where they've had great success? And let's allow these people to talk directly to some of their peers in those communities. They'll just reaffirm it and make it even more of a group, stronger decision to say, yeah. And then a year from now, when somebody asks a question, Chris could say, yeah, I talked to a guy over in that town who owns 3 buildings, and great conversation, and not just, oh, well, we did it because this person said it was a great idea. Let's have more people, and it just gets more people involved. And what you're proposing is a good idea, makes a lot of sense. I'm just trying to help make the argument even more convincing.
Thank you, Dennis. So,
If I
Alexa,
could, I was just going to add to that. So I put Fort Dodge on the National Register of Historic Places. I put Mason City, Iowa on the National Register of Historic Places. I put downtown Iowa City on the National Register. And so those communities, Northwood is a small community, but certainly Fort Dodge and Mason City are perfect models. And they've had a lot of success over an extended period of time. And I would say that they have faced a lot of the same challenges in terms of the scale of their downtown, the size of the buildings, loss to demolition and changes over time. And they have been very proactive about tapping into other programs like downtown facade rehab projects, those kind of things. So I would say both of those cities are good examples to look to.
Okay, Alexa, I appreciate this, Tim Clark. I would like to be, if we can get a listing of some names of people or property owners, like Dennis was saying, that would be very nice if we could get those to kind of pass around. And if we're talking about a time frame, is there a particular time frame that it takes to get this all established?
I'll start. I don't have an individual list, but I would recommend that you start with, in Fort Dodge, Vicki Reek, who's the senior planner. They're going to have a list of the current property owners in the historic district in Fort Dodge. In Mason City, Tricia Sandal, Sandahl. She is, last I knew, the city planner. So she, again, could give you a list of property owners. So that might be a good spot to start. They'd also have the information about some of the other programs that they pulled in to help support rehab, that kind of thing. What was your other question? Sorry.
I was just wondering what the time frame it takes to establish a historic district. What are we looking
You
at?
should plan on at least a year. And the reason for that is that there's very little there's gonna have to be an inventory of all the buildings and an evaluation. And I think Brent thought about 50 contributing resources. Isn't that what in the boundary that you and I talked about, the one you sent me?
Yes, that's right.
So say we're talking about at least 50 buildings, so there's going to be a level of research, and the amount of that research is going to depend on what's already been done. So you have some important buildings that are already listed. We already know a lot about Lafayette. And so the time required for those will not be very much, but some buildings we won't know anything about. So you have a component up front that's about evaluating the buildings, and knowing about them is what helps us determine whether they're a contributing and a non-contributing resource to the district. And then the nomination process goes after that. So a lot of review time between the consultant and then consultant, National Park Service. So it takes a while. It did occur to me, maybe I should mention up front that it would be good to understand the difference between a contributing resource and a non-contributing resource. So what we would do is establish what appears to be a boundary that includes the properties that have a likelihood of being contributing resources. And so in the end, a district has to have a good balance between those buildings which contribute to our understanding of the significance of a district against those that either don't because of their age or they no longer do because they've been altered so much. And so there's some consideration of that. It's important to have a good balance, but the other thing is that buildings that are contributing resources are the ones that are going to be eligible for historic tax credit projects, which is, I'm assuming that if you're looking at redevelopment or breathing some life into your downtown, you're going to want to be able to make historic tax credits available to the property owners. And the more contributing buildings we have, the more those people are going to have the possibility of benefiting from what's a really strong program for historic rehabilitation. And buildings that are non-contributing do not qualify for historic tax credits.
Alexa, this is Chris Hansen. Nice to meet you. Brent, good to see you again. I know kind of you started the conversation with creating a district. There wasn't a lot of negative, I kind of assumed. If we created a district, would that close any doors? And if so, what doors would that close?
I don't think it would close any doors. Most people, I mean, the assumption, like we talked before about the National Register, is that doors would be closed on people's ability to do what they wanted to. But again, the designation itself does not make that happen. If a property owner, I mean, I really think it's important during this process to make sure that the property owners feel like they're a part of the nomination process and that they have a chance to ask these questions, because I have seen projects that get derailed because, and sometimes when they're clear into the process, because the property owners become anxious about their ability to do what they want to their property. So the education component is you're going to be able to do what you want to with your property unless you take money from the government. And then the government is going to require that you follow the rules of whatever the program is, whether it's workforce housing or whether it's brownfield, grayfield, or whether it's historic tax credits. So they have freedom until they take money to do something to their building. And that's a big benefit because most buildings are going to need some financial help in order to be able to do particularly a major rehab. So. But I can't think of anything else. Brent, can you think of any doors that get closed?
No, I can give you an example just to maybe give some context. We've worked with we have a project right now in another town that we're doing federal historic tax credits on our residential. Several years ago, it was part of a kind of sprawling industrial complex, and that entire complex had been a contributing structure. The municipality used federal brownfield monies to demolish the smaller parts of it, of the complex. And when they did that, they had to go through a Section 106 review. And in that case, they were successful in making an argument that the significant portion we're redoing now was what was really important. And then they did a photographic analysis for the archives of everything before it was torn down. So it was still facilitated. But that's an example, I think, of where you would, once you do this, where you would potentially have an issue. But in our experience, it's been something we've been able to work through with the State Historic Preservation Office.
This is Cody. I'm on the city council. For the National Registry, that's for individual buildings, correct? That's not for like areas. Is that right?
The National Register is sites, objects, buildings, structures, landscapes. So, for example, a cemetery is not a building, but cemeteries are listed on the National Register. Is that what you're getting at? Is an area like that, or?
Well, I was just trying to figure out, I guess our first step in this process is defining an area. Is that correct? Or for the overlay district?
Well, the overlay district's a separate thing.
So what are we, historic district, okay. And then, okay, so that historic district, is that a city-led, like, does that start at the city level where they start this, does the city start this process, or like what Fort Dodge and Mason City do? Is it something that started at the?
Both of those cities got a certified local government grant, which is a match grant. You guys have CLG, right? A certified local government preservation, yeah. And so that program provides a good match. So both of those cities happened to take advantage of that program, and then they sent out an RFP. And both of those, it was a two-step project. They had one grant that did a survey, and so I did the one in Mason City. I didn't do the one in Fort Dodge, but that is the part where you look at every single building and you do site inventory forms, and through the development of that information, then the consultant makes a recommendation about what the boundary should be. That's a year-long process. And then they got another grant to do the actual nomination, which was taking all that information that had been developed about the individual buildings, putting it together, and then making a case, kind of an umbrella case for the context that those buildings are, as a group, a historic district.
Okay, and that's kind of the first step in the process then. If Clinton were to do this, that's kind of where you start.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I can't remember,
that's
but
the typical place to start.
Yeah,
I beg your pardon.
remember John Rowland years ago, they did this because we had the conversation with Cindy Nagel from the Historical Preservation, and they did the survey part, but it might be like 90s.
Yes.
And so one of the things we talked about too is, that it all starts with that. We need to know what we don't know anyway, meaning get that updated. And at that point, then I think the reason we want to have the downtown Smith involved is that's really their decision at that point. But I think that might be a city-led thing if we can get some matching grants to go ahead and start that, because it is a long process, but during that, we're going to find out about the different buildings, what's going on with them. It doesn't hurt anybody. And then at that point, then you guys can determine, do we want to do the next step?
I agree. What is the typical cost, Alexa, that you
Millions. No.
see? I know that's probably a loaded
Ballpark
question.
It really depends on how many buildings you're talking about. So I don't think I'd be comfortable just spitballing it without even, I think we're too early to do that. But I mean, I think that you have to figure that it's going to be, say, $30,000.
Okay. And I'm also, if we're we have two downtowns technically, so we also have a part of our other downtown that needs a lot
But that
of
might
help
be,
too.
that might be a little cheaper just because of the number of
Oh,
buildings.
yeah,
that-
for sure. But I'm wondering, would it make sense to do those together, Alexa, or not?
I think so, because you're talking about Lion, right?
Yep.
Right, and so Lion was where the city started, and so that that's the precursor, and a lot of the information that you're going to learn about the history of the city comes from the history of Lion. So if you're doing them both at the same time, it's going to be beneficial, I would think.
Okay. All right.
So
Thank
much
you.
overlap. Yeah, absolutely.
True. Yep.
See, Matt, don't we have some historic districts already in Clinton, or we gonna have none?
Castle Terrace.
Yes.
Where's that at?
Castle
Castle.
Terrace.
The houses,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Are you familiar with that, Alexa? It's actually really cool.
What's it called? Castle?
Castle Terrace.
Castle Terrace. It was
Yeah, I'm not.
Ida? Was it Ida Lorenzen?
Yeah.
So yeah, we had a lady that actually took it upon herself and did it, and it's kind of like the Tudor-looking houses with the wood that does some of the framing on it, but it's really neat. But that is on the historical. And then we have, I think they probably need to be updated, but it's either 17 or 19 buildings that are on the historical register, several in the downtown. I think though, with all these folks that are sitting here, we could kind of give you a good ink print where the areas would be that we would need you to look at to start those for. But, yep. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I did, if I might. Alexa, I'm Mark Volich. I was on the council and mayor for about 14 years. So this came up, this is a little context for some people. About 2010, the Historical Preservation Group wanted to go and make the downtown a historical district, and it blew up in their face. Because what they presented is not what I'm hearing tonight, and that's why I'm just going to ask this and make sure that we're on the same page here. They basically, if we had this district, they would control the facades. You couldn't demo a property without permission. You couldn't do any remodeling without basically all the standards that the historical group wanted. And you couldn't even make the change of use, because I brought up the topic that if I owned a building and I decided I wanted to sell it and it was going to become a grocery store and it was zoned correctly, they said you couldn't do it. So we're not talking about a district that's that restrictive, are we?
No, and I mean, the only thing I can think of is if that was the Preservation Commission, perhaps they had a dual purpose there, which was putting it on the National Register and creating an ordinance or an overlay that added all those protections.
It may have been, they didn't use the word overlay. They made it look like that was all part of the issue, and that became very objective or people were opposed to that you were going to lose control of your property.
Yeah, absolutely.
And with like Castle Terrace, everybody up there, those houses all kind of look the same. You have to kind of maintain they have to kind of maintain that architecture. Well, downtown we have a little bit of everything as far as architecture right now, and to try to restore a building to an old, a 1900 style, and the next door property has now got a 2024 style to it, seems counterproductive. But, so we're not talking.
Did they use the terms design guidelines?
I don't think so. It was they just threw this out, and this was their proposed what they wanted done, and it got into it came to a subcommittee when the council had subcommittees, and it died there because nobody could agree to the fact that we wanted everybody in the district was going to be under a control of the historical preservation group, is the way it sounded. It was not a friendly meeting that we had, and I want to make sure we don't have something. Well, I want to make sure that we don't have something, that we're not talking about any of those type of things.
No, you're not.
Okay.
Without going to the next step.
Mm-hmm. Mark, who was behind that at that point?
The Historical Preservation Group, a few of the people that belong to it. I'm not sure some of them are still alive, but they were very much restrictive. They did not want any remodeling done in the downtown unless it was vintage 1900. And so, it was like, it kind of, a lot of property down there doesn't look like the 1900s anymore, so it'd be very hard to do that.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll just say that today, if a person was if a property owner was on the National Register and they wanted, and a downtown property owner, and they wanted to do a historic rehabilitation, the purpose is to identify the features of that specific building and what's left that's historically significant, and then provide guidance about how do you do what you need to that building. Adaptive reuse maybe is one of those things, or replace a storefront and have it be sympathetic to the character. It's never about making it look like something that's next door that doesn't look like it, or even going back to, if it now looks like it's from 1950, making a person go back to what it looked like originally. That's not even allowed.
Well, that's good to hear, because I had posed them a question. I said, let's say, for instance, a property owner, their parents owned the property, and it was a house, because they were wanted to districts around town, and the son lived in California. They die, and he decides to sell the property. And he sells it, like I said, they wanted to, it could be a supermarket or whatever. And they said, well, that would be blocked. We wouldn't allow that type of sale to take place because you'd have to keep it as a home. And, you know, that's where it got to be like, well, you kind of don't have your own use of your property.
Yeah, and that's a pretty tough sell to anybody.
It didn't sell.
Yeah, that sounds like more of either a form-based code or a preservation district. The National Register and then the affiliated historic tax credit program is 99% carrot with very little stick. So it's just generally a benefit to owners, and it's a benefit, I think, to the community because somebody is eligible without a significant amount of additional legwork to apply for the program, and then they can get the 25% state credit and the 20% federal credit. Now they have to comply with the Secretary of Interior standards, but that's generally a benefit to the neighborhood. So instead of, say, a cheap vinyl window that's going to break in a certain amount of time, they're going to have to buy a compatible window. Tuck point is going to comply with standards that'll keep it in good stead for a long time. Other parts and pieces, you're going to get a better end product because they're getting the benefit of the program.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. More questions or anything like that? Or otherwise, Dan, would you like to?
And I apologize if I missed this at the front of the meeting and for being late. For my question, though, I was just going to say, my understanding was always that these types of opportunities were meant to assist towards what is likely a more expensive project. If you want to be more historically accurate, a lot of times I think we know that that's maybe the more expensive solution. And so this is a funding opportunity that can help support that decision for people that want to make that decision. But I guess the strings attached are all well known before you commit. So you're not bound to anything, like they said, until you do commit and accept that fund. And please correct me if I'm wrong. My question is, I guess, is we're limiting this just to the boundary of the existing SMID, or are we looking at all in the adjacent neighborhood and properties? Because there are a lot of other historic properties. Some of them are residential. Are we just talking about commercial properties? And that's the part maybe I missed on the front end. Because if we're talking about having enough inventory to satisfy whatever threshold or quorum that is needed, it might be easier to satisfy that if we expand and embrace maybe some of the surrounding neighborhood. And I don't know if that was discussed at all.
I mean, I can talk about a little bit about establishing boundaries, but I don't know anything about the SMID boundaries, so I'll leave that to others. But the idea about expanding boundaries is how far you can expand them has to do with whether or not you can make a case that a house and a post office and a downtown drugstore all contributed in the same context. So usually what happens is that there's a buffer area between a commercial core and then the transition to residential. And once you get into the residential itself, then that's a separate district. So lots of times, like in Mason City, there's areas of transition where there was a post office. It wasn't right on Main Street. Same thing in Fort Dodge. So there is a way to push them out a little bit, but once you kind of break the edge and you're in a residential neighborhood, that's a separate district that's specific to usually the history of community planning and residential significance of residential architecture design.
Yeah, he asked Alexa the question if churches or others could be added in. I'm just going to add in, I think something you said was a lot of it's with the survey that gets done. And so when these pros come in and take a look at these properties that you guys have, then they can see where they are. And then that helps then create a boundary that then could be picked at and said, hey, these things that we just looked at, this would qualify for national tax credits, for example. Hey, exactly. We want to make sure we incorporate that into the area.
Yeah, and the other thing is that you may have properties in at the fringes that you, for whatever reason, want to see developed, and so those would be things you'd want to know about before we do the survey, so that we can logic in whether or not the context is such that would support including it when it might not seem possible on the, on the surface. So some of those things you'd want to take into consideration as you think about the long-term health of the downtown.
So really, just to kind of reiterate for you guys, it'd be, there's really no risk at all to do a survey to find out what we know and don't know. And at that point, I think it'd be very vital to have your team come back when that survey is done and say, do we want to do this or not? And if we do, what should that boundary be based on recommendations from the folks that do the survey? Is that kind of where you guys are tracking? Chris looks like he's ready to hit the button.
Chris is probably ready to buy a few more buildings. That's probably what's going on. So.
Yeah.
Question?
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Hi, Andy
Hi.
Sokolovich, President and CEO of Grow Clinton. Is this better off municipal led, or is this better off with a like Grow Clinton led?
Yeah.
I mean, because you'll have to go out for RFP.
Yep.
So I mean,
I'd
don't
love to
know
have
if-
Grow Clinton, but I think it's a combination of all of us.
That's
But-
what I'm saying. Is
Yeah.
like is it, what I'm going out for an RFP to solicit bids to conduct the survey. If we're going to include the north end, does this make sense for us to do in partnership with the city of Clinton, and Grow Clinton take the lead to contract with the surveyor?
Yeah, so Alexa and Brent, this is Andy. He is actually like economic development, chamber, tourism guy, all wrapped up in one. And so, and he takes the lead on certain things, and this might be a great piece to do that in combination of funds coming together. But when you get ready to do this, do you really care who's saying, hey, here's the bid that we want you to, our RFP we want you to respond to, and then you get going? Does it matter? Or is it better municipal? Is it half and half? What have you seen in your travels?
I mean, I don't have any reason to think that it matters much. Sometimes communities will choose to put it in a certain agency because of how the RFP is required or not required. And this is outside my area of expertise, but on some downtown facade projects, they purposely put a sub with a different person so the city didn't have to do an RFP process. I'm not recommending that. I'm only just telling you I know that sometimes that happens. And the other thing that occurs to me is the city would be eligible to apply for the CLG program, but Grow Clinton wouldn't be. The HRDP project or program was another grant program that was suspended in this last year. That's also another way to apply for funds, and maybe Grow Clinton can apply for HRDP grants. And I don't know what's going to happen to that program. So again, part of it's about where, who can get what money, right?
Yeah, just trying to simplify the process, because if you went through, the municipality went through, you would have to go through how many?
Several meetings, set the public hearing, put the bids on Ion Wave.
So I'm just trying to figure out how we fast track it a little bit.
I'm voting for Grow Clinton in that case.
She voted.
Well, it sounds like the city of Clinton's got to take the lead, and then we want to have the downtown SMID and Grow Clinton and Lions should all partner up with you. So.
Well, and I think maybe the first step is that CLG go after a request for a grant to help, to pay at least a portion of this, because let's say it's, I don't know what you've seen before, but you said let's just say it's around $30,000 to $40,000 for the survey. If we can get 50% of that through a grant, we're silly not to go get that. And then after that, we can run with it after that. We'll make sure whatever the grant people tell us, we'll abide by their policies and procedures. But I just keep coming back to this, is I wanted you guys to make this decision, not the city or us. But
will it take to get that grant?
I don't know. I'm gonna talk to Dave Furkey at Fort Dodge tomorrow, because they just had this done, and I want to get some kind of insight. There you go. Uh-oh. Grant man.
There he is.
Matt Parbs, also Grow Clinton.
Hey, Brent. It was just due September 3rd, and for 2024. Yeah, so it'd be September. So that's one of the hard things with the grant is, and that kind of aggressive timeline. I don't want to wait. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Short and sweet.
Yep. You got the information we need.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I
if,
had
if,
one-
we say, let's say,
I'm sorry,
Alexa,
I was
that.
just, I
Oh,
was
go
just
ahead.
going to say one other thought, which is if you want to do Lions and Clinton, is there an S on Lion or not?
Yes.
Yes, Lions, you're going to have to, I think you'll have to split it, do them as two projects, but do them at the same time, which maybe impact where you apply for grant funds.
So I was going to ask you, Alexa, so in your experience of doing this is like as far as the next steps for us though, like say we don't wait till next September to get the grant, is the next step really an RFP for the survey?
I think the next step is defining a survey area. So we do have to have some loose boundary to
I
get
get you.
started, right?
Yeah.
So you define a boundary, you get some information about, I mean, what you're going to need for your RFP. So you're going to have some notion of how many resources you have, and then yes, issue an RFP.
And I'd ask the DCA Schmid is we look at that because, you know, the easy starting place would just be to look at where we currently have the fringe and where we have the downtown core, like as a starting spot. And then you guys tell us, maybe what we do is we just include all the C3 area that's in there as we start. And then when we give it to the survey folks, then they can kind of start to look at those historical things that are there or not within that C3 area.
How's that line up with Bush Construction?
No, that, because they're in the fringe.
How's it line up with their applications process, I guess?
Well, if it takes a year to get, I don't know. I'd have to ask Brent because they're moving fast, right?
Yeah, we probably have to start working on stuff pretty quick.
Yeah, but
There's a
from,
master plan for Lions too that we could use for that
To help.
boundary area.
yeah,
Well, we have.
And we have a plan for here,
master
too.
Plan for downtown that was done,
maybe we could pull that out and just so you guys could take a look at it, see if it makes sense.
so they all have copies. I
Yeah.
got them copies.
Oh, they got them copies?
Yeah.
Brent, question. I know when we toured the Jacobson building, you kind of informed me about some other grants and I guess federal funds that I was not even on my radar at all. I was wondering if you could kind of speak more to the board here about those.
Yeah, I think in particular for that property, I thought it'd be a fit for the New Market Tax Credit Program. And that can stack with the federal and state historic credits. So the new markets are explicitly for commercial development. They're also applicable for business investments. So they can be in real estate or in an operating business. But they're a 35% credit on an allocation. The census tract you're in is pretty desirable. The way that program is administered is Treasury pushes out a couple billion about once a year to community development enterprises around the country. They then go to break that into sub pieces and deploy it. And there's a high mandate on making sure a percentage of that goes to rural communities. So that would definitely be a fit for some of the properties downtown. And nothing we would do with the historic district here would either invalidate it or make it more feasible.
What's it called again?
New market.
Does that answer your question?
They leverage for the Wilson building.
Yeah. But in your case, Brent, when you're going forward with historical tax credits, you're still going to be able to put in for those in lieu of having a downtown historical district?
Yeah, we'll submit the National Register nomination that Alexa's prepared and seek individual listing on the property.
Matt, question for you. Anything with this and what's going on with the YMCA currently that would conflict, or?
No, I don't think so. Hopefully, when we're all said and done with the YMCA, if that building is still continues to be structurally sound, that will be historical tax credits can take advantage of those. I might have shared this with Brent, but for Alexa, our old YMCA is we're going to take part of it down because it's been deemed dangerous structure. And we're hopeful that the 1905 section can still be good after that demo. But what SHPO locally is saying is that those tax credits would still be available for historical at the state level anyway. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Any more questions? Nobody? How about the audience? Dan's got to have some more questions, I'm sure.
I was going to make one more point when you evaluate the boundary and process internally too. The look back period for historic is 50 years. So generally, not hard and fast. So that puts structures from 1974 and before as eligible as long as we can build the case for them to be contributing.
Yeah, we ran into that problem with the west side of the Y because it happens to be 60s and 70s, so yes. Yeah.
So Brent, if we, is there a possibility for you guys to be filing grants after you may start some construction on that? Is that a possibility, or is this holding up for your progressing with your project here in town?
For the Lafayette end, no, we're moving ahead. This is more about we'd like to be a long-term partner, and we think this makes a lot of sense and facilitate future projects.
That's the answer I wanted. Yes.
That was the right answer, huh?
I'm going to pivot back to completing the low-income housing tax credit application after we get off this call. So we're going to file that on Friday.
And I have my paperwork for you.
Great, appreciate that.
I was just thinking, I appreciate bringing this before the SMID to be involved, but a couple of the comments you made kind of, we're trying to put the decision maybe heavily upon this group, but if we are talking about Lions and there's any potential of outside the SMID, I think we need to make sure that we're having everybody that's appropriately involved at that table or whatever, and I think that was mentioned, so I don't know if it's just up to the SMID, I guess.
Well, no, the Lions Ice Cream Scoop was added. I mean, we called you guys together because it started with, which is fine. But no, I think the SMID it's a valuable organization that needs to be part of the decision making on this. We're just not going to run ahead and do this. If you guys have no interest, then we will not proceed.
Are we going to need to take this to a
Yeah.
city council meeting, you
Yeah.
think? So I think maybe if the Schmid, it just gives a
Oh.
the Schmid gives a thumbs up, we need to talk to the Lions folks, and then the Historic Preservation Commission, and then kind of got 4 different entities that should be the core entities involved with it.
Do we need a motion of endorsement of this so it can move forward?
That'd be awesome.
I would make that motion then.
Okay. Mark's got a motion. Have we got a second? Mike, second from Mike. Very good. Oh, we need a vote.
Yeah,
now.
got to vote on it.
How about, okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexa and Brent.
Thank you.
Actually,
Absolutely.
Alexa should have been paid a lot of money because you have a lot of good knowledge on this that most people don't even know. So we really do appreciate it.
Absolutely. If there's anything else I can do, let me know.
Hopefully, you put in for our RFP for survey.
Send it my way.
Okay.
Thank you very much again from
Bye,
us.
everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
The mic's off? So Bush did say.
We off, Stephen? Yeah.
Yeah, we're done, bud. Turn it off.